This is City and State TV. I'm Albany Bureau Chief John Lentz. Joining me today is Peter Owanowitz, Executive Director of Environmental Advocates of New York. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks.
And one big environmental issue in the news lately is these crude oil shipments coming through by rail to the Port of Albany. There's been talk about derailments, various incidents, and is there enough oversight, is there enough safety precautions being taken to ensure the safety of these shipments? The governor recently sent a letter to the federal government asking them to increase oversight, to step things up. What does your organization see as the real issue here, and what needs to be done?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked. First, we've seen an alarming growth in the amount of crude oil that's being shipped into New York. They bring it in from the middle of the country, actually North Dakota, where they actually use fracking technology to pull oil out of the ground in North Dakota. They load it up on trains, ship it here to Albany, where some of it actually continues down the Hudson River banks and by train, and other portions of the crude oil is put onto barges and then floated down the Hudson. So there are several different issues. First, there's the health and safety of the communities all along the rail lines from Buffalo to Albany and then Albany to New York City. This type of crude oil has been found to be extremely volatile, very explosive. So when there's accidents, they're usually quite catastrophic. So there's that issue. The second issue is spills. Oil spills are notoriously hard to clean up. It causes a tremendous amount of environmental damage when they do spill, and it's a big public health concern. The third issue really is a development that sort of is about a new permit that the big oil companies want to have that will enable them to bring, which we believe would be the oil from the Canadian tar sands, which is the big subject of a national debate of whether or not to build the Keystone XL pipeline. What the oil companies would like to do is look at the Hudson River as their East Coast version of a Keystone XL pipeline. They would like to bring this highly dirty, toxic, and most carbon-intense form of oil by rail into Albany and then ship it down the river. Big problem with that is spills are inevitable with this industry. Big oil has a history of spills. I mean, look at the Gulf of Mexico and other places. We're really worried about all the efforts that we've done to restore the Hudson's ecology and to bring that river back to life. The billions have been spent. All could be at risk with one of these types of spills with heavy crude oil from the tar sands.
And this permit you mentioned that's under consideration, is that a federal issue? Is that a state issue?
No, it's a state issue, really. It's Governor Cuomo's decision to make whether or not he's going to enable some of the most toxic, carbon-intense fuel to be brought into New York and then floated down the Hudson. It's not anything that is up to the feds. This is a permit issue before the state.
Now, it seems like the governor has reached out to the federal government, sent a letter to the transportation secretary asking for greater oversight and more study into how to improve this process. How does that break down? What role does the federal government have? What role does the state have? You were at DEC for a time.
Yes. Well, I mean, the federal government does have primacy when it comes to, the federal railway issues. I mean, so the governor is correct in sort of asking the feds to really step in and sort of handle these types of issues. The state can work in partnership with federal authorities to inspect and make sure that the trains going through New York are safe. The federal government can do a better job of alerting state officials as to what type of chemicals are on these trains, what the issue of concern could be. But the state can also do some things like, we could set up a fund so that our communities along all these railways have resources available to prepare for disasters and to clean up after spills. So the governor could actually propose like an importation fee on each rail car, say a penny a gallon for every gallon of crude oil brought in. That would go a long way to making sure our first responders were well trained, that they had the equipment available to clean up from these catastrophic events and spills, and that if they actually happened, there'd be a fund of dollars there to tap into. So there are certain things that the state can do. It's not just a federal issue, and we're asking Governor Cuomo to get involved. First and foremost, we shouldn't be setting a permit condition up or approving a permit that would bring in this dirty tar sands oil to New York. The Hudson River is no place for tar sands oil.
Switching gears, another big environmental issue in the state this year is brownfields. The current program is expiring. The governor has proposed reforms to the brownfields program. How do you see that playing out this year? Is there opposition to it? Are these reforms good reforms?
Well, first off, the Brownfield program is broken. We've said for a number of years that the cleanup program is not working to actually achieve the amount of cleanups that we want. There's some thousands of sites of brownfields across this state, and in the life of the program, It's only been 150 of them cleaned up, yet billions of dollars have been spent on this program. They've gone to real estate developers building extravagant malls outside of the city of Syracuse. They've gone to the city of White Plains, where a real estate developer built a Ritz-Carlton hotel. That's not really what this program was supposed to be about. So it's broken, it needs to be fixed. The governor has proposed some fixes, we're supportive of them. We're hopeful that in the next couple of weeks here in Albany, those fixes will get done and we'll reform the program before this budget season's over.
Do you see much opposition to those reforms?
There's opposition to it. Is there much? I don't know. I mean, folks in the business side tend to work sort of below the radar or underneath the water, or whatever your metaphor is. But we think there's broad support both in the Assembly and the Senate for fixing the program, and we're really delighted that the governor has started the conversation by putting reforms in his budget this year.
Another issue you're looking at is pesticides. What's going on there on the state level?
Yeah, so unlike the good news in the governor proposing Brownfields reform, there's some bad news coming from the governor, and he, in his budget, proposed eliminating key provisions of law that are important for a right-to-know perspective, but also important for health researchers who are looking at the link between pesticide exposure and whether or not those pesticides make people sick or trigger diseases like breast cancer and other forms of cancer. So what the governor has proposed, and it was buried within his budget, but we unearthed it and found it, is a repeal of the language that requires people who use pesticides, commercial applicators, to disclose that information to the state. And to significantly modify what amount of information is then also available on the sales of pesticides. Right now, you could type in and ask for information from the DEC, how much pesticide was sold in my 5-digit zip code area, and the DEC has that information and they would tell you. What the governor would like to do is change that sales stuff to a county basis. So rather than zip code area, which is much more local, it'd be county. So that's watering down the effectiveness. But most importantly, when you take away the information about where pesticides is used, you undercut good health research and good health science. So our organization, Environmental Advocates, has banded together with a whole host of partners, including some leading child research experts in the state, to oppose what the governor is doing. And we're heartened. We've seen 4 Long Island Republican senators write to Leader Skelos and asking him to oppose the governor's changes. We've seen similar action coming from the state assembly Democrats opposing what the governor's doing. So we're not sure that this is actually going to come to fruition in the budget negotiations, because you have bicameral and bipartisan opposition to what the governor's proposed.
And one last question. With the state's energy plan, the state is holding hearings around the state at various communities to get input. I think hydrofracking and natural gas is one big issue in terms of what the state's energy plan is going to be going forward. Where do you see that as an organization?
Yeah, well, first, we're really pleased that the draft state energy plan recognizes that New York State has a commitment on the books to reduce greenhouse gases that are associated with the impacts that our changing climate are having. So that's really a positive affirmation of a policy that was enacted when I was in the governor's office back in 2009, and it's not personal. But that adoption and reaffirmation of that commitment says that we will reduce greenhouse gases significantly. We will tackle climate change. The problem with the draft state energy plan is we don't see an adequate trajectory to get to that overall reduction. And the reduction is an 80% decline in emissions in between now and 2050. So it's a short time period to get things right. And what we don't see in the plan is the roadmap to get us there. You're going to need a heck of a lot more energy from renewable energy sources like solar and wind and hydro. You're going to need to do a lot more in terms of funding energy efficiency and individual home weatherization projects. A lot of things you're going to need to do. And what we don't see is really the plan to get there.
Peter Wonowitz, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks.